Well, hello and welcome to some continued supplemental teaching. This teaching specifically is going to be the Law of the Land, Part 3. And so this will be taken out of Deuteronomy chapter 22 and chapter 23. And so I invite you to join me at this time as we go through this lesson. The reason why this lesson specifically I chose to do via supplemental learning was because there are some more adult topics that we need to talk through as we now look at Scripture. So keep that in mind as you are listening to this. If you are with children and there are some things that maybe you're not ready for them to hear or talk through, you might listen to this specific teaching on your own and make a judgment call as to how you would have your family to learn and lead God's Word. So starting off, in order to have a good idea of what we're going to look at today, I'd encourage you to, you can stop the video here and read through Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 13 through 30. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 1 through 23. Those will be our two main texts. And then in addition, it may be helpful to read Numbers chapters 22 and 23 as we look at the story of Balaam and this prophet for hire. Some things you might pray and think through both before and after this learning. Is one, are you serious about holy living? Is that a priority in your life? Two, do you take your vows with God seriously? Do you make vows with God? And if you do make vows with God, do you honor them? And lastly, are you leading your home in the laws, in God's instruction? And so maybe a little bit of a challenge there as we seek to lead our homes to follow after God as He has instructed us. So bearing all that in mind, I want to go ahead and begin by offering up prayer, and then we will get started looking into Deuteronomy chapter 22. Father God, Lord, I do pray that this time that we spend digging into your word, this time that we spend trying to understand your laws and you and your character more in depth, that you would bless this time, Father, that your servant would speak clearly and that it might minister to those who are listening. Father, that we could understand your word and that we could apply it to our lives and that we would be blessed because of our obedience. And it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. So we're going to begin in Deuteronomy chapter 22. If you want to turn there with me as we look at starting in verse 13. Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 13. It says, "If any man take a wife and go unto her and hate her, and give occasion of speech against her, and bring up an evil name upon her, to say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid. Then shall the father of the damsel and her mother take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city in the gate. And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this man to wife, and he hateth her. And lo, he hath given occasion of speech against her, saying, I found not thy daughter a maid, and yet these things are the tokens of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city, and the elders of the city shall take the man and chastise him, and they shall amerce him 100 shekels of silver, and give them unto the father of the damsel, because he hath brought up an evil name upon the virgin of Israel, and she shall be his wife, and he may not put her away all his days. But if this thing be true, and the tokens of virginity be not found for the damsel, then they shall bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men shall stone her with stones, that she die. because she hath wrought folly in Israel, to play the whore in her father's house, so shalt thou put away evil from among you. If a man be found lying with a woman, oh, let's pause there actually. We'll stop at verse 20. 21, rather. So, in Israel, as it should be all over the world, virginity was prized as a very high possession. To offer to your husband or your wife your purity was the highest, the thing of most value that you could bring to your marriage. Now, God's laws surrounding purity and presenting yourself chaste at your wedding day, those things have not changed in the last several thousand years. But what has changed is our society's view on purity. And so virginity has gone by the wayside in both media and our culture today. It used to be that there was at least a sense of it being taboo to have sex outside of marriage, and specifically sex before marriage, which is what we would call fornication. But today it is celebrated as the highest form of conquest. And so, men and women alike, they talk about their number and how many conquests essentially they have had in their lifetime, as if this is a thing to brag about rather than a thing to be broken about. Our culture, it waits for nothing. Our culture wants everything right now. You think about, a house. If a person wants a house today, they don't spend years saving up the money and then go purchase the house when they can afford it. They go to the bank and they say, I don't have enough money right now to get the thing I want. And then the bank gives them money, gives them a loan. And then they agree to pay interest for that thing that they are borrowing for. And so now, because you wanted this $300,000 home, you have to pay the $300,000 plus the interest. And when you're done paying your loan, you're paying almost double for the same house that has not the same value. And so, why do we do that? Because we want it now. We don't want to wait. I can still remember when you had to watch TV and you had to wait for the commercial to be over. And you just waited. And when the commercial was over, you watched your show again. Now, of course, you can skip commercials, or you can even pay a little extra and have no commercials at all. You think about, a vehicle. If you wanted a $40,000 vehicle and you didn't have $40,000, well, you just go and you secure a loan and then you pay it back with interest and you can get what you want right now. Don't worry about the consequences of that action and how that's going to, tie you in and imprison you to that debt. But this is our culture, right? Nobody wants to diet and exercise in order to get the body that they desire, but they want a quick fix. They want a pill, or they want a experimental drug that will give them the same effect. When I was a physical therapist, everybody wanted to just walk into the PT clinic and for me to just fix them and send them on their merry way without pain. Nobody wanted to do the exercise and the lifestyle changes that was going to be necessary to achieve that goal. They wanted a quick fix. Everybody wants the pleasure that comes with gratifying the flesh in sex. Our culture, our media, they all advertise this. They all talk about the benefits, the things that you will enjoy, the temporary joy, but nobody talks about the consequences of that act. And not just the consequences of producing a child that you're not equipped to take care of, but also the emotional baggage and the emotional trauma that comes with that. There is danger in casually giving away pieces of yourself so that when you get to your wedding night, there's nothing for you to offer of value to your husband or to your wife. And so God understands that. God knows that that is a problem that we all are going to face, a temptation that we're going to have to overcome. And so he puts a very high value on purity, on maintaining our pureness, so that when we do engage in this beautiful gift of the wedding bed, it is something special and not something polluted. So in order to protect purity in Israel, in order to protect a woman's virginity, which is what was expected of her when she married, same for the husband. The husband was to be a virgin as well. Well, then they would, God established these laws surrounding purity there in Israel. And so in verse 13, we see that there is a desire for purity to be maintained. Verse 13, it says, if a man take a wife and go into her and hate her. Well, why would he hate her? Well, the understanding is he hates because she was not pure. All right, if we read the rest of this passage, we get the context. He's his hate for her. That word doesn't necessarily mean what we would call an English hate, but it's his displeasure for her. Is that he has found her not to be chaste, not to be pure. And so he has entered in on his wedding night, and he has taken her to be his wife, and they're now going to consummate the relationship, and he has found her not to be pure. And this is a problem for the man and for the woman as well. And so what they would do in ancient times, not just in Israel, but in many ancient Semitic and even pagan cultures, is they would have a token of virginity. And so they would lay down typically a white silk or some other fabric blanket on top of the wedding bed. And then the husband and his wife would then consummate their relationship in the marriage bed. And what would normally happen with a woman who was pure is she would bleed on this first time. And so the white blanket would receive blood stains. And then that was given to her father the next day as a token of her virginity. Now, what the context of this is the husband has found out that she's not, in fact, pure. And there is no token of virginity because when they engaged in the marriage bed, there was no evidence of her purity. And so they go and they present themselves to the elders or the judges there in the city, and they present evidence. And so the husband's making an accusation against the woman, the wife, saying she was not pure. And the father, who's representing the woman, because a woman cannot defend herself in court in Israel. So the father presents the token, or he does not present the token, depending on the situation. If there's no token to present, well, then he's got no evidence. And we see that if the husband is incorrect, if he falsely accuses this woman and says she was not pure, but in fact she was, because there's evidence, because this token has been provided, well then the father of the woman would present the evidence, the token of her virginity, and then the man would have to pay 100 shekels of silver. That's a pretty significant amount of silver. That's a large sum. And then he had to honor his marriage vows to her. So, recognize this isn't the man saying, I don't want her to be my wife. I want a divorce. his reason for thinking this is that she's not pure. If it's proven that she is pure, he has no reason to hate her. And so he is obligated to love her, to care for her, to provide for her as a husband should there in the land. However, if it is demonstrated that she was not pure and that she had engaged in fornication outside of her marriage, well, then she was to be dragged to her father's doorstep, and the city was to stone them, to stone her specifically. And the reason, look at verse 21, it says, because she hath wrought or brought folly in Israel to play the whore in her father's house. So shalt thou put away from among you, put evil away from among you. So a very harsh penalty given so that purity in Israel was upheld to the highest standards. And so this would put fear in the eyes of all the women, men as well, not to engage in this kind of evil behavior. Now, this whole context is actually really important to understand when we look at the Nativity. So in several months, we'll have Christmas. It'll be here before you know it. You might as well start shopping. You're going to start seeing those. There's only so many, Mondays till Christmas. Those will be here soon. But at the birth of Christ, when Mary, of course, she is a virgin. The Word of God testifies to that. But she becomes pregnant. And so, because we understand how anatomy works, there has to be the act of the marriage bed for consummation or conception to bring life. And so she is found to be with child, which would imply, outside of a miracle, that she had been unfaithful to her husband Joseph. And Joseph and Mary, they were espoused. That would be legally married, but they had not yet consecrated their marriage. So they had not yet participated in the marriage bed. And so all evidence from man's perspective seems to suggest that she was unfaithful. And so, according to the law of Moses, she should have been dragged to her father's doorstep and stoned. Now, of course, the Jews, they couldn't carry out that punishment at this time because they were under Roman occupation. So Rome would not allow the Jews to carry out capital punishment. But at the very least, they could have shunned her from the community and shamed her. And she would have been kicked out of her father's house, essentially to be a beggar. But the Bible says that that didn't happen. I want you to look with me at Matthew chapter 1 and verse 19. It says, Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man, and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privily or privately. So the man that God chose to be the father to Jesus Christ, he was a just man, a fair man, a man who was not willing to make Mary a public example and to shame her publicly. What he was willing to do is to basically annul the marriage and to step away from the situation rather than shame her, which was his right as a Jewish male. Now, of course, Joseph had not yet had the angel Gabriel come speak to him. When that happens, and he's convinced that this is of God and she is a virgin and she has her purity, well, then he's more than happy to continue with this marriage. Now, some have rightly pointed out that this doesn't seem fair. The woman gets dragged to her father's doorstep and stoned. The man just has to pay a fine. Well, realize the man hasn't done anything immoral in this situation. He is offended and hurt because he believes her to be impure. Once it's determined that she was not impure, well, then he is to accept her as his wife and to love her and to sacrificially give for her. He's to pay a fine for his error, an act of shame and no doubt it hurt, a sacrifice there. But in this scenario, the woman has actually committed wickedness. She's actually committed immorality there in the land, and that is what's being punished, is the immorality. And so we see the reasons for such a severe punishment is to remove that wickedness from the land. Next, let's look at verse 22. It says, if a man be found lying with a woman married to a husband, then they shall both of them die, both the man that lay with the woman and the woman. So shalt thou put away evil from Israel. So here we're talking about adultery. And so either the woman or the man, either of them, if they're married, well, then this now changes from fornication to adultery. And here, both of them are complicit. They're desiring this thing, and they engage in this thing willingly. And so they are both to be stoned publicly. And that is, again, to remove the wickedness from Israel. Now, this is the situation that we find in John chapter 8, verses 4 and 5. It says, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? So they're quoting this passage in Deuteronomy, and they rightly understood that the woman should be stoned. What they have failed to do is bring the man, who also by the law should be stoned. And so they're manipulating the law to fit their needs. But their question to Jesus is, the law demands death, a severe punishment. And they were under this misunderstanding that Jesus was bringing this message of peace without justice. See, Jesus is his ministry doesn't do away with the law. In fact, he says, I fulfilled the law. And so he rightly judges that, yes, she should be stoned. And so should the man, who is not here. But he switches it, right? And he makes sure that they understand that in order for them to carry out this capital punishment, which is just, they must first assess their own life and their own sin, because you were to carry out the judgment only first with a clean heart, with a repented heart. And so he simply says, you're correct. Whoever is without the sin, you cast the first stone. And of course, none of them were without sin. None of them had taken the time to assess their spiritual condition. And so none of them were ready and legally allowed then to carry out that punishment. Now, of course, Rome would have not allowed them to stone. That was another part of their ploy. They're trying to get Jesus to incite a stoning so that Rome would go against him. But they're trying to trap Jesus in this situation, and of course, it doesn't work. But Hollywood and media and even music, right? They glamorize adultery. And they spin it, of course, to where it's more palatable. They would say, if your spouse is not romantic enough, well, that coworker that has been vying to get your attention, they'll be romantic. They'll be romantic, of course, until they accomplish their goal, which is to take from you. Your spouse is not giving you enough attention, or maybe they're distracted by one of their other passions or their work trying to provide for you. Well, then just go find someone who's willing to give you that attention that you crave and that you desire, because, of course, you have needs. And, of course, I'm not picking on male or female. I'm picking on you both alike, right? This is what both sexes deal with. But, the media and the books that you read and these romantic movies you watch, if that spark that you once had with your husband or wife, if that spark has gone out over the years, well, you're just not in love anymore. And so go find your next soulmate. Go find someone that you can be in love with. Because after all, this life is short. In those moments of passion and in those moments of lust, nobody considers the children that will be devastated. Nobody considers the lives that will be torn apart. Nobody considers the relationships and the friendships that are going to be damaged. No one considers the purity that will be robbed from you and the sanctity of the marriage bed that will be polluted. Nobody considers those things when they're in the middle of lust and gratifying their flesh. The sin of adultery is grotesque. The sin of adultery is evil. It was not to be tolerated in Israel. It should not be tolerated in our churches. We should not have individuals who are engaging in adultery and have to be brought forward for church discipline. 2 months ago, there was a scandal with the CEO, and he was caught cheating on his wife at a Coldplay concert, and everybody had their fun, and they did memes and videos, and they poked fun, and they, even today they're still acting it out. And what stood out to me was that if we as a nation were obedient to the standard of God, and if we were under the law, and we brought them out and stoned them publicly, well, there would be a lot of people who would be offended, right? There would be a lot of people who would say, that shouldn't be so in America. And I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying, just mentally think with me. Would that create in your mind a fear and an intense opposition to the evilness of that sin if the death penalty came with it? I dare say it would. Right? And that's the point God is trying to establish here. Is it's not that he wants to see people undergo capital punishment. It's not that he wants to see men and women stoned. It's that he does not want to see the effects of adultery in the land. And he is so willing to ensure that that evilness does not permeate that he's willing to enact such a severe penalty in order to keep that from becoming routine and part of their culture. What it amounts to is that God is serious about holy living, and so should we as Christians. We should be serious about holy living. We should take it serious when we're, Psalm 101:3, "I shall put no wicked thing before mine eyes. I hate the work of them that turn aside. It shall not cleave to me." What do you put before your eyes? What kind of movies are you watching? Maybe it's a romance, but ultimately, right, if she's leaving her husband for this romantic fling, that's adultery. That's not something we should celebrate. That's not something we should envy. Same for fornication. Those aren't things that we should celebrate. Of course, that makes it very difficult to watch, any movie really, but we should have a burden and a desire not to put that evilness before our eyes so that it does not become commonplace, so that we do not build a tolerance towards it and start to become desensitized to that kind of wickedness, but that it remains that wicked. It offends our senses. That's where it should stay. Now, in the next scenario, there's two different locations being mentioned. One's out in the field, one's in a city. And we're going to deal with a pretty heavy topic. And so I'm going to try to use some euphemisms, but there's only one way to really describe some of these things. So again, watch at your own discretion, and if you've got little ones learning there with you, make sure that you do your due diligence in protecting them until they're ready. Look at verse 23. It says, "If a damsel that is a virgin be betrothed unto a husband, and if a man find her in the city, and lie with her, then ye shall bring them both out unto the gate of the city, and ye shall stone them with stones, that they die. The damsel because she cried not, and being in the city, and the man because he hath humbled his neighbor's wife, so thou shalt put away evil from among you." Okay, so in this first example, you have a man who is not married, from what we can tell, but a woman who is engaged to be married. So she is still a virgin. She has not consummated her relationship yet, but she is taken with what appears to be by force, but she does not call out. She does not scream. She does not yell. And so the implication, that the context of this is, well, then she desired it if she didn't cry out for help. So that's the understanding, is that she was taken maybe by force, maybe it was consensual, but she did not cry out and seek help. And so in this situation, both of them are to be stoned because both are seen as complicit in this act. Verse 25, "But if a man find a betrothed damsel in the field, and the man force her and lie with her, then the man only that lie with her shall die. But unto the damsel thou shalt do nothing. There is in the damsel no sin worthy of death, for as when a man riseth against his neighbor and slayeth him, even so it is with this matter." So in this second situation, again, you have a man who is not married, and the man, it doesn't matter if he's married or not. That's irrelevant. But the woman is betrothed, so she's still a virgin. She is engaged to be married. She's out in the field, and this other man takes her by force and violates her. And so when the investigation of this matter is heard, there was nobody near to hear her cries. So she cried out for help. Nobody was able to respond. And so this evil act was carried out. So she's not guilty of anything. She was violated. She was taken advantage of. And so she is suffering no penalty because there's no sin worthy here. But this man, he is to be stoned to death, and rightly so. And so we see that a very severe punishment given towards that type of evilness there in the land. And I want you to notice here in verse 26, it says, at the end of 26, it says, "For as when a man riseth against his neighbor and slayeth him, even so is this matter." So this is equated to be equal to death. Right? If you rise up and kill your neighbor, it's viewed as the same as you've taken his wife and you violated her. That's equal to death, and the punishment is equal to death, and rightly so. Look at verse 27. It says, For he found her in the field, and the betrothed damsel cried, and there was none to save her." So, she tries to save herself, but there's no salvation. There's nobody to come and to save her. Now, next we see verse 28. It says, "If a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and he lay hold on her and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lie with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, because and she shall be his wife, because he hath humbled her. He hath not put her away. He may not put her away all of his days. A man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt." So in this third scenario, you have a woman who is not betrothed. So she is just a virgin. She's not engaged to be married. And again, she's out in the field, and a man takes her by force and forces himself upon her and takes from her her virginity. Now, because it's out in a field, during this investigation, they don't know whether or not she cried out. She may testify that she did, but again, a woman's testimony was not heard in Israel. And so it cannot be determined whether or not she was complicit, she desired this thing, or whether or not she was taken by force. So that can't be unknown. There's not enough witnesses and evidence to support either one. And so the ruling for this situation is that the man was to pay a fine, because if it was if both parties were in agreement, well, he did it the wrong way. He did not come to the father first, arrange a dowry, and marry her the proper way. And so he has to pay a fine. If it were by force, well, then we'll look in a minute, there's a provision for that. So regardless of if it was by force or voluntary, the man is to pay a fine and he is to marry her. Now, immediately, right, that should offend many, especially if you have been the victim of such a heinous crime. But realize that there's a provision for a woman who was violated, who did not desire to be married. In fact, her father could veto this process. So look with me now at Exodus chapter 22, verses 16 and 17. It says, "If a man entice a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife." So he's going to pay a fine to the father. "If her father utterly refuse to give her unto him, he shall pay the money according to the dowry of virgins." And so he was to pay the money, but he was not to marry the daughter. So the father could choose to keep the daughter there in the home and just exact a fine from this man. And so he had the opportunity to protect his daughter. But there was a benefit for her marrying him, even if it was by force. Again, culturally, women didn't have a lot of rights. So this was a means of protecting her, not giving him an allowance. And so if he took her by force, or if she was complicit, he was obligated to marry her, to care for her, to provide for her, to elevate her there in Israel, to give her status. And so something good would come from this evil. But if this evil was such that this woman could not marry, and just, the father could come in and he could stop that whole process to protect his daughter. And so there was provision there. So in summary, a man, he would be forced to marry the virgin, but there was a provision for the father to keep her out of that if it was deemed more beneficial. Look at verse 30 again. We see, I lost my place. There we go, verse 30. It says, "A man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt." That simply means a son is not to have inappropriate relationships with his mother, but more commonly his one of his mother or his stepmothers. So as it was common in Israel to take multiple wives and even concubines, if the father passed away, there was a tendency for the son to then take one of his wives or concubines. Moses says that kind of behavior is not to be tolerated in Israel. That's not something that they need to do. And so both of those, take his wife and discover his father's skirt, those both mean the same thing. It's to either see them naked or to be in an intimate relationship with them. Both were not to be tolerated. Paul rebukes the Corinthian church for the very same immorality. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 and 2, it says, "It is reported commonly that there is fornication among you, and such fornication as is not so much as to be named among the Gentiles, that one should have his father's wife. And ye are puffed up, and have not rather mourned, that ye have done this deed, that he that hath done this deed might be taken away from among you. So there in that church in Corinth, Paul advises them to remove that individual from fellowship until they repent of that sin, so that that sin would not be tolerated there in the church. Moving right along, now we get to chapter 23, and let's read the first 8 verses that deal with laws concerning acceptance. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 1 through 8, it says, He that is wounded in his stones, or hath his privy member cut off, shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. A bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to his 10th generation, so shall he not enter into the congregation of the Lord. An Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to their 10th generation. They shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. Because they met with you not with bread and with water in the way, when ye came forth out of Egypt, because they hired against thee Balaam, the son of Beor, and Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse thee. Nevertheless, the Lord thy God would not hearken unto Balaam, but the Lord thy God turned the curse into a blessing unto thee, because the Lord thy God loved thee. Thou shalt not seek their peace, nor their prosperity, all thy days forever. Thou shalt not abhor the Edomite, for he is thy brother, and thou shalt not abhor the Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land. The children that are begotten of them shall enter into the congregation of the Lord in their 3rd generation. So we've got some laws concerning the congregation of the Lord. What is being prohibited is them being in a position of leadership. So the priests, the judges, the rulers, they could not have some of these characteristics. Priest more than anything, right? They had to be Levite first of all, but they could not be a product of one of these relationships. So first we see that verse 1, if a man has been hit in his private area, or he's been castrated, or he's had his member removed, those were common of what's called a eunuch at that time. It was very common in servitude. They were not to serve in the congregation. They were not to be in leadership roles, such as a priest or a judge or a ruler or an elder that made decisions, or a king. None of those could be of these types of individuals. And the reason is because if they were going to represent God before the people, they needed to be pure, complete. Verse 2, it says, A bastard shall not enter the congregation, even unto the 10th generation. So therein, we're not, the word doesn't mean a man without a father or a child without a father. In fact, actually, the Hebrew word is mazmir, which refers to an individual who was the product of a prohibited relationship. And so of course, the Israelites, they were commanded not to have marriages with certain peoples. And so if, for instance, an Israelite and a Canaanite had a child, that child was considered to be mazmir, or polluted, or in English, that's where we would get that word bastard, but it doesn't mean the same as how we would understand it to be. So it's a polluted relationship, and so that child was not to serve as a leadership position because, again, that child does not have a representation of pureness. And God said you are to keep all things pure and holy. So it's not that they couldn't be citizens or that they couldn't live in the land, but they could not be in leadership roles, is what's being communicated. Also, in this, other than just prohibited unions, you would also have incestuous unions. Those were not to be allowed. You can see more of that in Leviticus chapters 18 and 20. But they were prohibited altogether. There was never I'm sorry, I misspoke. They were prohibited to the 10th generation. So they had 10 generations before they were allowed back into this leadership capacity. And God had determined that's how long it would take for them to be considered pure and holy again. And so after that first generation, right, they would have to find another Israelite to marry and then keep it Israelites for 10 generations. Next, you see the Ammonite and the Moabite are not to enter into the congregation of the Lord or be in these leadership positions. To the 10th generation as well. And of course, that was partly, as it continues to say, it was because of the sin of Balaam. So what happened with Balaam is Balaam was a prophet for hire. And so he's a prophet to many false gods, but he also was a prophet to Jehovah God, the Most High God. And so people would come to Balaam and they would give him money and he would prophesy in their benefit. He would curse their enemies, essentially. This is what Balak comes to do. Balak, he comes and he hires Balaam. And Balaam, instead of cursing Balak's enemies, which would be Israel, he blesses them 3 times. And of course, that's what's being mentioned there. It says in verse 4, because they hired against thee Balaam, the son of Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse thee. Verse 5, nevertheless, the Lord God would not hearken unto Balaam. He didn't listen. And he turned the curse into a blessing. So 3 times Balaam, he blesses them. And finally, Balak, he just says, hey, stop talking altogether, because every time you talk, you're blessing my enemies instead of cursing them. So Balak, the king, and Balaam, the prophet, they change their tactics. And Balaam, because he wants to get paid, he says, well, you know how you can defeat them is let's bring in sin and wickedness into the land. And so they bring in temple prostitutes, and it causes the men to go after these ladies of the night, and causes their lines to be blended, causes their marriages and their offspring to be polluted. And so because of that, the Ammonite and the Moabite were not allowed to be part of this congregation. So the offspring of the Ammonites and the Moabites, who both of them were that's who Balak was ruling over. So they were not to be part of this leadership there in Israel as well. And then in verse 7, we see Edom. Of course, Edom, that would be Esau's descendants, they were near of kin to Israel. They would be basically cousins. And they were not to be, if they had a relationship between an Israelite and an Edomite, that had to wait 3 generations before they can then be viewed as pure again. So significantly less because they were closer in kin. But again, this idea of let's keep it pure, and it's not because the Israelite race was greater than the others, but it was because of the culture and the idolatry of those other nations. So to keep them away from the culture and the idolatry, they were to remain pure, just Israelites, so that they maintain the same culture and identity. It's important to understand that a pagan could become a Jew, and they were viewed as a Jew, right? So the idea is they're keeping their Canaanite and their pagan ideology in this union. So if they were to enter into that union, they'd have to wait 3 generations before they could then be in a leadership position. Let's look at verses 9 through 12. When the host goeth forth against thine enemies, then keep thee from every wicked thing. If there be among you any man that is not clean by reason of uncleanliness, that chanceth him by night, then thou shalt go abroad out of the camp, and he shall not come within the camp. But it shall be when evening cometh on, he shall wash himself with water, and when the sun is down, he shall come into the camp again. Thou shalt have a place also without the camp, whither thou shalt go forth abroad. So in Israel, the army was required to remain ceremonially clean, which included no relationships with your wife prior to going into battle. See that in Leviticus chapter 15, verses 16 through 18. It says, if a man's seed of copulation go out from him, then he shall wash all of his flesh with water and be unclean until even. And every garment and every skin wherein is the seed of copulation shall be washed with water and be unclean until even. The woman also with whom the man shall lie with the seed of copulation, they shall both bathe themselves in water and be unclean until evening. So if a man experienced a discharge, whether it be voluntary or involuntary, that's that part where it says, that chanceth him by night. That's an involuntary discharge. He was considered to be unclean ceremonially, so not physically, but ceremonially. And he would need, let me unplug that. He would need to carry out cleaning in order to be ceremonially clean again. And so that would keep him from battle. You were to be ceremonial clean before you entered into battle. Look at verse 13. It says, and thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be that when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, that thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. This is a number 2. The idea here is you're going to have a shovel attached to your weapon so that when you have to take care of business, number 2, you can dig a hole and you can bury it so that it was sanitary. So you weren't walking around with, something that somebody else was going to step in. And so this would keep the land from becoming foul and odor, but it would also keep the land from disease and rampant disease, really. If you look at the Middle Ages, but one of the reasons why the bubonic plague took off was because of the state of the sewer systems in that area, and they had sewer literally going out into the streets. And because of the filth that they were living in, they put themselves in a position to be overcome by this disease and the rat infestation which carried it. Verse 14, it says, for the Lord thy God walketh in the midst of thy camp to deliver thee, and to give up thine enemies before thee. Therefore shall thy camp be holy. And he, that he see no unclean thing in thee, and turn away from thee. So God says, hey, I live here. Right? You want me to come and dwell with you? Okay. Keep yourself clean. Keep yourself holy. I don't want to be walking around and stepping in your stuff, right? And so that goes for the physical cleanliness, but also ceremonially clean and being in a right state of holy living. So God says he intends to dwell with you, but you got to do your part and keep everything clean. You know, where I grew up in Wild Peach, I didn't have any shortage of pastures, specifically cow pastures, or animals that didn't dig a hole and bury their wastes. And so if you were to survive with clean shoes out in Wild Peach, you needed to tread lightly. You needed to watch your step as you walked. Now, I had a patient once that was not your typical cat lady. And upon entering into the home, it was obvious to me that I was not going to sit down and I needed to watch my step. As much as I tried to avoid the minefield of cat feces, I stepped in it. And the smell of the house was rancid. I didn't even put my bag down, and my bag was covered in a trash bag to protect it. I was taking short breaths in fear of inhaling too much of the odor, and I could not wait for our time to be over so that I could flee her presence. Now, I'm not proud of this, but I even assigned one of my assistants to go visit this patient on a routine basis so that I did not have to. I had no desire to be in her presence. But notice my attitude. I wanted separation from her. You know, in ancient Israel, there was a valley outside of the gate there in Israel. It was called the Fish Gate, and they would take their human waste and they would throw it out this gate. They would take the carcasses of the animals that they offered in sacrifice, the portions that they were not to eat, the entrails and the skins, and they would throw it out the gate. And old food, they would throw it out the gate. And then eventually this valley, it would get larger and larger and larger because of the trash and the rotting flesh. And so they would set it on fire so that it would burn down, so that they could add more at a later date. The name of this valley is Hinnom. But later in the Greek, it was known as Gehinnom. And it was even shortened later to Gehenna in the Greek. And what we find is this transliterated word from the Hebrew to the Greek. It's where we get the word Gehenna from, and it's translated into the English as hell. The obvious picture that the Israelites started to develop was that separation from God would bring you to the valley of Hinnom, this place that is waste and rotten flesh and garbage set on fire. That is the picture that they had for what hell was. Now, hell is not actually that, but hell is separation from God. And it's beautiful because it's kind of like the cat lady. God has no desire to live with you in hell. He has no desire to live in your filth that you're surrounding yourself with. And so God, he says, okay, if we're going to live together, you got to clean up your act. And of course, you can't clean up your act. You're stuck in this filth. It's all you know. But God reaches in and he takes you out of this filth. He takes off your garments that are filthy because of your filth, and he washes you. He cleanses you, but he washes you with his own blood, as it was the only thing worthy. And he puts on you new clothes of righteousness, and he puts you in his home, a home that has streets paved with gold, and it's beautiful, and there's no rancid, burning, rotting flesh. And so we have this beautiful picture of, do you want to spend your eternity in your own filth, separated from God, or do you want to spend your eternity made clean, made anew, made perfect in the very presence of God for all eternity? It's a beautiful picture. And I encourage anyone, if you're watching this, maybe you one of our church members put you on to this and you wanted to see what it was all about. If you have not made a decision for Jesus Christ yet, every person will have to face that time of judgment when you stand before God, and God says in his word he will require it of you. And he will require you to make a decision, to either choose your filth or choose the washing and the regeneration that only Jesus Christ can provide to you. A couple more laws and then we'll be done. Look at verse 15. It says, "Thou shalt not deliver unto his master the servant which is escaped from his master unto thee. He shall dwell with thee, even among you, in the place which he shall choose in one of thy gates, where it liketh, where it liketh him best. Thou shalt not oppress him." So here we're told that if a slave, the understanding is he was a Gentile, not an Israelite, flees into their land seeking asylum, they are not to refuse him. They are to welcome him into the land. They are to provide for him. And they were not to be cruel masters that handed that slave back over to their Gentile owners. Now, of course, this does not apply to the Hebrew slaves. They already have a law established for their release, but specifically speaking of the Gentile slaves, and the reason is because they used to be slaves. So they were to show compassion towards other slaves. Deuteronomy 23, verses 17 and 18, it says, "There shall be no whore of the daughters of Israel, neither a sodomite of the sons of Israel. Thou shalt not bring the hire of a whore or the price of a dog into the house of the Lord thy God for any vow. For even both these are an abomination unto the Lord." So in the land there was to be no prostitution. Here is a reference specifically to ritualistic prostitution, which was common among the Gentiles. They would give their seed in order to ensure that the crops in which they planted would be fruitful. Now, of course, this appealed to the men as they were fulfilling their flesh, and they believed that for gratifying their flesh, they were going to get a spiritual benefit. It is not so in God's kingdom. Now, in the King James Version, the term whore means a prostitute that is performing this ritualistic ceremony. So she worked for this temple, the pagan temple. And the word sodomite can be also understood as perverted ones. It refers to men prostitutes. So there were both men and women prostitutes. And they would engage not with women, but they would also engage with other men who would give their seed in order to benefit their crops. But the real reason was so that they would gratify their flesh. And so you see both heterosexual and homosexual relationships going on here. This would never be how you offered worship to Jehovah God. This was considered idolatry and evil and wicked. It was not to be so in Israel. Next, we have laws of usury. Verse 19, "Then shalt thou lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury, unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thine hand to in the land whitherest thou goest to possess it." So they were not to charge interest on a loan that they gave to their fellow Israelite. We covered this when we looked at the law of debts and the forgiveness of debts. They were allowed to offer it to a Gentile or a foreigner, but they were not to do it to one another. And of course, we see that throughout history as the Jews became very wealthy throughout history in lending money, but not to one another, to Gentiles. The word usury there, it also has context of not a fair amount of interest, so an excessive amount of interest. And so again, historically, we see that the Jews have, throughout history, charged large amounts of interest and gained vast wealth because of that. There was a young man who was watching cartoons in the living room, and he wanted a snack. And so he went to his mom and said, "I want a snack." She said, "Yeah, you can have a snack, but you got to stay in the kitchen." And so the young man, he kept his toes in the kitchen, but he laid prone on the floor eating his snacks so that he could see the TV. And so By all accounts, he was obeying his mother because his toes were still in the kitchen, but he was fulfilling his desire in watching TV. And so this was his acceptable compromise. But it's human nature to walk next to a clearly drawn line of what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And so, getting right up to the line but not crossing it, that is human nature, and probably more than many other cultures, we see that the nation of Israel, the Jews particularly, they were very seasoned in this type of rebellion against God. Rebellion of the heart, of just drawing right up to that line of acceptance and then making a way for the thing that they really desire to happen, but without breaking the law according to their standard. And so you have all these provisions for law so that they can do what they really want to do, but they're not honoring the heart of God's, or they're not honoring God's heart in giving that law. We see that after leaving Babylon, this nation transitioned from being shepherds and farmers to bankers and businessmen, partly because that's the only way they could survive in Babylon, but partly because they were very good at lending money to others and being successful in this endeavor. And so that newfound skill was brought back with them into the land. And during the First and the Second World Wars, we see that the Jewish nation was hated because they had capitalized nearly every market, and they were responsible at the level of the bank and the lender. And so the German nation and others, they were feeling the hurt of borrowing money at high interest rates. And according to the Jews, right, they weren't doing anything wrong because God allowed them to lend usury to the Gentiles. But this is where a lot of this anti-Semitism comes from, in the fact that the Jews often would come in and lend money, and they would really abuse the Gentiles in lending of the money. Of course, it was all come about fair, but the winner, as we often see with many cases, the winners continue to win while the losers continue to be beaten up as we lose. And so this was not the heart of the law. Right? The heart behind this law was to cause the Jews to love one another so much that they would not lend usury to one another, and that they would be prosperous in the land because they were obedient to God, and God would allow them to lend money to other nations, but not to take advantage of them, but as a blessing for their obedience. And of course, they weren't obedient, and they received the curse of God, and that's why they were scattered. But again, tiptoeing this line between what God allows and what God's heart is, an error we all fall into. And so that was the heart behind it. Last thing, and then we're done. Deuteronomy 23, verses 21 through 23, says, When thou shalt vow a vow unto the Lord thy God, thou shalt not slack to pay it, for the Lord thy God will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee. But if thou shalt forbear to vow, it should be no sin in thee. That which is gone out of thy lips thou shalt keep and perform, even a freewill offering, according as thou hast vowed unto the Lord thy God, which thou hast promised with thy mouth. So plainly put, you were not obligated to make vows to the Lord. But if you made a vow, you needed to keep it. There was no allowance to not honor your vow that you made to the law. So if you made a vow and you didn't keep it, that's sin. But if you never made a vow, that is not sin. You're not obligated to make a sin. Now, you might desire to make a vow because that is an act of worship. Certainly it's an act of worship, but keep your word as to what you say you're going to do. Some will make vows of sacrifice, such as giving a certain portion of their goods. Some say, I'm going to give you X amount based on how you bless me. So if you make a vow to the Lord and you say, Lord, I'm going to give you 10% of all of my income that I make at my job, then you don't do that, right? That's breaking a vow. That's sin because you made the vow. God didn't require you to make that vow. You made the vow. Others would make a vow declaring, fasting or a dedication of something to the Lord. So if you say to the Lord, I'm going to fast for 24 hours, and then you find yourself with a Snickers bar and ate, that's sin. Not because eating a Snickers bar is a sin, but because you made a vow. And God didn't require you to make that vow. If you're going to make a vow in an act of worship, you keep the vow. If you get hungry at 8 hours, you call your friend and you ask them to pray with you. In 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9, Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and he reminds them of a vow they made. While in Corinth, the Corinthian church vowed to give money to help the saints in Jerusalem. And so later, Paul, he writes them a letter, and he says, hey, you made a vow that you were going to give money. Now, give the money like you said. Otherwise, it will be sent to you. So Paul wasn't saying, that he expected them to give money because there was a need, but he's saying, you made a vow to God. Now I want you to honor that vow so that it will not be sent to you. And so we see the high cost of making a vow. Deuteronomy 23:22, but if thou shalt forbear to vow, it shall be no sin to thee. So if you never make a vow, you can't break it. But do realize, don't be afraid of making a vow to God, because a vow is an act of worship. And it is a beautiful sacrifice that you will make as you're bringing your worship to Jehovah God, the only one who is worthy of everything that we could vow, everything we could give. He's worthy of it already. But I know this was a long teaching. I know that time is valuable, but I do think that it was edifying for us to go through this. And I did find it necessary to do this in a more intimate setting so that you could use discretion when teaching and leading your families. But I do hope this is a blessing to you. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, Pastor Gerry with a G.FBCClute@gmail.com, and I will do my best to respond to you. Take care, church. I'm praying for you, and I can't wait to see you all again. God bless.